3, 2, 1, and we're live. I'm really interested in your relationship with the university because I think you likely bring a lot of unidentified, misunderstood value to the university, because there is this culture within the university of need to write research, need to get published, need to write a book, need to do these things, need to prove to everyone that you've been in so many publications or had your name in so many pieces of work, that connecting with students and your evaluations and this connection that you build and it's almost impossible to understand the value that you've brought to our community. Because if you think of every single course you've taught with all the students and all those students who might be operating in the world now based on a class you took and that impact on their education, which again, students have told me your specific impact on them today, and likely you haven't talked to them or they haven't reminded you of that recently. And so you're playing this role in the community that's having this vast impact of, I had a lot of professors, but I can only name a handful that really helped me get here today. And those professors always put the responsibility back on to me, the student, to contribute. So like Mark Lalonde, I had the pleasure of having on because he was like, write a 20-page paper on a global issue related to like the various levels of how it impacts not only Canada, but the other countries and how that all plays out. And then do a second paper and make it double the size. Mm-hmm. And so now it's 40 pages. And so it felt overwhelming, but he was like, do it on whatever issue you see and really break it down. And so it put a lot of pressure on me, but I developed as a consequence of that pressure. And I was actually interested in it because I chose it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's the role you play, but we don't always understand what a professor does in community. We often think, well, you taught students. But those students go back into the community and they become our politicians, our future professors, our tellers at the bank. They become our, like all these different areas in our lives that we don't always link it back to that name, but we're all networked together if we've graduated from UFV, because those professors did have impact. And I know a few police officers who have spoken very highly of you. And so you can see that our concerns about how police are walking to the door is being impacted and informed by great professors like yourself. And so I'm interested to understand more your understanding of the university framework, where we're at now, because I think we've been talking about that type of issue for a while. Where are we at now, and what more could we be doing?
Well, first, thank you. It's lovely to hear some of that positive, and anybody that says it doesn't matter is not telling you the truth. So thank you for that. Yeah, I don't think we're where we need to be. And even for a place like UFV that is, smaller and regional, so we don't operate even under the same legislation as UBCs and SFUs, we still talk too much, in my view, about peer-reviewed as a very narrowed idea of peer review. I mean, that's not been my path, right? My career path has been community-based research. And community engagement. So, not just research as in terms of proper, but how do you work with communities to even just to help navigate particular situations, or policy analysis where they're wanting to be more inclusive around something. So, my CV is not going to impress those who have that narrow idea of what it is to be an academic. But I don't think that's a helpful definition. I think we have to have all of it. I think even when we're reporting, we still are asked to, is it a peer-reviewed or not? And I think, how am I supposed to tell my community members, whether, as an example, working with an Indigenous organization, we've had these 3 projects with this national group. So when these Indigenous leaders are sitting around the table, describing what they're looking for, providing context, reading what we do, providing feedback, they don't count as peers. Like, their expertise is not valued in a very traditional idea, which is still used so often. Universities generally celebrate single authorship still, because if you and I write something together, Aaron, maybe Martha didn't do very much. Maybe it's all Aaron, and how will we know? So even though we talk to our students about collaboration, teamwork, community, partnerships, the institution still values single authorship, first authorship, journal publication, those kinds of things. And academic publishing is important. I'm not single, et cetera. I think we need to bust out of that much more. So no, I don't think we're doing as well as we should, as we could. I mean, the reaction to some of my approaches tells us that, in terms of giving students more autonomy and more power around that. I don't think we measure. I'm not a fan of teaching evaluations. I think I try to check in with my students on a regular basis about things that work and don't work, or how we can make things better. So I think the university is still has so many of its roots in spaces that we could create much more productive engagement with our students, et cetera. And so, yeah, it's an uphill battle for lots of people that are trying to push against that. I don't think I'm understood very well sometimes by by some of my colleagues, by some administration. I'm not into hierarchy. I embrace that I have power in the classroom, because I think it's wrong not to. I mean, I grade.
Yep.
But when I'm navigating, I want who should be at the table. Students should be at the table. If I'm trying to do something in the university with CHASI, I'm not going to sign something I'm not supposed to. But I'm kind of put off when, well, what level are you at? Martha, why aren't you doing an administrative route, like that kind of thing? I love teaching.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine my life not being in the classroom.
Yeah.
COVID has been incredibly hard. I get that I was privileged overall, but really hard in terms of those of us, who all of a sudden weren't able to be engaging with our students. So very selfishly.
Absolutely, though, because I do think that that's where students connect and really grow as a consequence, because it's tough to connect over Zoom because we're both kind of putting on a facade of I'm all dressed up, and like you saw, some people weren't even wearing pants during their interview, so that we're dressing up for the part that we're supposed to be seen, and you see that people let things go if they're not being seen fully. And so I do think that that is the case, but I think on top of that, I think we miss out on the idea that individuals have a relationship with people that allows them to grow and develop. And that's why I actually really support Rate My Professor, because of course, and I talked to Spencer about this, of course there's going to be those nonsense reviews that are, they made me read a book and so it was so unfair that I had to actually do the readings or something like that. But then you get these insightful comments about how great professor, worked really hard, just didn't tailor it for me, or those comments where you kind of see where the professor's lines go up and where they draw distinctions. And I think trying to create that environment is so important, because that's what I think builds real leaders, and not leaders in the everybody listens to me, but people who are willing to start the conversation. And that's what I saw a lot of in my undergrad, was nobody wanted to start the conversation. So we're in a group and we're all sitting and we don't know who's supposed to talk first and who to defer to. And when you're a real leader, you're just willing to not be in charge and direct everybody on what to do, but say, what do we want to do, guys? Let's get started. I'm really excited about this aspect, so you guys tell me what you're interested in. That's being a good, healthy leader, because it allows other people to play to their strengths still, without putting in that top-down approach of saying, you are doing this, you're doing the editing and that's it, and I'll do the artwork and you don't do, like, that relationship of telling people what to do. And so I'm interested to see what comes of this, because I see that Spencer has a lot of those positive characteristics of wanting the students to really benefit and seeing the value, and not just being a researcher, but being an educator and sharing information with people, because that is what the podcast's about. And that's my favorite professors and the people who had the biggest impact on me always created the space to have the discussion and not to shy away from it. And I think that that's something that, you're right, the university does struggle with. But what are some of the tools we can use to combat that? What can the community do? Because there's far more of the community than there are of the university. And so what can the community do to really facilitate that relationship and to show our support for the professors like yourself, or for like Spencer, who are willing to have a more interactive, involved approach? Because I think that that's what discourages Indigenous people, people in poverty, from going to school, is the elitism, the how much have you published? What are you about? Prove to me that you're educated, and show the peer-reviewed evidence.
Yeah, I mean, really, sound self-serving, but I think one of the ways is the community can really endorse and support and partner with CHASI.
Yeah.
I believe we're doing something different. And again, every time I say that, it feels like an uphill battle, and sometimes where people think that sounds like I'm saying we're better. We're doing something different, and we're really trying to honor community. So I think it'll be interesting for us to see how community partners, they're starting to describe that relationship to the university, right? So they work with Spencer on something that are like, wow, this whole CHASI approach, and I had this great relationship with Spencer or Leah or Esther or whoever is in there, and we got to keep this going, you know, or they'll ask, you know, the board members or whatever. So I think whether it's CHASI or other organizations on campus, the community being vocal when we do things well and when we don't, right? Like coming and saying, yeah, you guys dropped the ball on this one, right? Yeah. So I think that's really important because I think the university structures are still really hard. Yeah. Like the accessibility is not great. Yeah. I sit at some tables and we sound horribly elitist, and we use concepts and language that its sole purpose is to alienate people, right? And that's never been I've tried really hard to make sure that's not the space that I move in. Yeah. I talk when we're at the dinner table at home is the same way I talk in my classrooms. And I think that's important.
I agree. The other part I've asked multiple professors from UFV about is this. To me, the most important part of the university is the professor, is the educator within it. Yep. I think the United States went in the wrong direction. One of my fears is that we could follow suit, because we often do in regards to mandatory minimum sentencing, in regards to drug offenses, we just follow suit with what they do and pay the consequences about 5 to 10 years later. And one of my fears is that we need to recognize the value that the professor brings. Because when I talked to John Haidt, he was like, I don't know where I'd be if I was trying to be a professor in the United States, because what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to offer isn't valued. The administration is sort of the most important part of the university now, and so me being a professor, I don't provide, and I'm not as recognized as I am at UFV. And so I want to make sure that we kind of protect the importance of the professors within the university. But what I see is not enough from I'm not seeing enough from the professors in terms of being willing to interact with the community, being willing to do a podcast, being willing to start their own podcast, being willing to create a Patreon page or a YouTube channel where they just talk about what they know. Because I think that that's one of the big limitations. Like, we talk a lot about getting people in inner cities and people in poverty into universities. But part of the reason they don't is because they have no relationship established there. And so doing a camp, like I remember when all the universities came to start a secondary and they were trying to pitch us, but they were pitching us on like the most uninteresting aspect of what you could offer at a university. We have the most elite people and I, being somebody who didn't know if I was going to go to university, that didn't help. Knowing that you're very successful in a very accomplished university wasn't going to convince me to go, because I want something accessible, something I could see myself being in. And I felt that when I got to go with my uncle to UFV and look at the space and check it out and understand what was going on there and what all the different buildings were. And so I'm interested to know what professors can do, or what you think we can do to make sure that professors are recognized for the value they bring to the community, and creating those relationships between the professors at the university and the community, because I think that CHASI is playing that role as well. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more, and I think there's a few different ways into that conversation. I think universities need to appreciate that faculty are the core, and that's because students tell us faculty are the core, right? So why you pick or why you stay or why you enjoyed comes back to faculty. It's unlikely to be about food services. And that doesn't mean they're not important to the culture of the university. So I think the university has to do better in terms of profiling faculty. And then, yes, I think faculty need to be thinking about how they can intentionally engage with their community in terms of knowledge that they hold and knowledge that they want to gather, research that they want to do. And all of the instruments you suggested are great ones. And so I think that's one of the ways that CHASI is trying to mobilize around social media. And I do talk about it because we're pretty proud of it, because we do think we responded to a need. We were asked to do it. This wasn't my idea. It wasn't our idea, community's idea. And I think we are actualizing what they saw. And we're working really hard to do it. And it's an uphill battle because it's all the things you just described.
Yeah.
And those are not as measurable and as explicitly valued. I think they're implicitly valued. I think that, we talk about their importance, but I don't think we've figured out a way to demonstrate their importance in terms of, coming out of COVID, like support. How do you make sure some of these initiatives keep going as we come out of it? So I think that's profoundly important. And I do also think we can learn from other places.